"Fly out, Grandma. We want you here for the birthday dinner." My son said, so I landed at the airport. When I landed at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, I waited at the pickup area for 20 minutes, watching families reunite and couples embrace, while I stood there alone with my overnight bag and my granddaughter, Emma's carefully wrapped gift. I called my son, Erickson. It went straight to voicemail. I called again 5 minutes later, then again. Nothing. Other passengers from my flight had all been picked up, and I was standing there like a forgotten piece of luggage. The airport security guard even approached me to ask if I needed help finding transportation. Finally, after 30 minutes of waiting and feeling increasingly foolish, I called an Uber. $45 to get to the restaurant. Money I really couldn't afford to spend after already paying for the flight ticket that Erickson had promised to reimburse me for. "Don't worry about the cost, Mom," he had said when I hesitated about flying out. "We'll take care of everything. This is Emma's special day." That promise, like everything else that day, turned out to be a lie. When I got to Romano's, I assumed the pickup confusion was just a miscommunication. Maybe they were running late. Maybe there was traffic. I sat in that lobby for over an hour, waiting for my family so we could celebrate my granddaughter's birthday. My hands were trembling, not just from the cold, but from the crushing realization that was hitting me. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was calculated cruelty. I dialed Erickson's number with shaking fingers, and when he finally picked up, his voice was so cold it could have frozen hell. "Mom, we are just running behind. We will be there soon." But then, moments later, I got a message that turned my life upside down. If you've ever been betrayed by the people you love most, hit that subscribe button, because what I discovered about my family that night was just the beginning of a story that will make you question everything you think you know about loyalty and love. Here's what I need you to think about while I tell you this story. What would you have done if you had discovered that the people you sacrificed everything for had been planning your humiliation for months? Because what happened next didn't just change my life. It destroyed theirs completely. To understand how I had ended up sitting in that airport and then that restaurant lobby, humiliated and heartbroken, I need to take you back 5 years to when I made the biggest mistake of my life. I had given up everything for people who would eventually throw me away like garbage. 5 years ago, I was a widow, living comfortably in Chicago. I had my own home, my own life, my own identity. I was painting again after years of caring for my dying husband. I had friends, a book club, a routine that gave me peace. But when Erickson called me crying, saying he needed help with little Emma, and that they missed me so much, I didn't hesitate. The guilt was immediate and overwhelming. What kind of grandmother chooses her own comfort over her family's needs? I sold my house, sold my furniture, sold everything I had built over a lifetime, and moved to Phoenix to be closer to them. I used that money to buy a small apartment near their neighborhood, because I wanted to be the grandmother Emma deserved. But even then, a small voice in my head whispered, "Are you making a mistake?" I silenced it. "Family comes first," I told myself. "Family always comes first." And at first, it felt like the right decision. I babysat Emma every single weekend so Erickson and Ivy could have their date nights. I paid for Emma's piano lessons when they said money was tight. I covered her school supplies, her field trips, even their family vacations, because I wanted my granddaughter to have everything. When Erickson lost his job, I didn't think twice about covering their mortgage for 8 months. 8 months of my own retirement savings keeping them afloat. But here's what I didn't tell anyone. Those 8 months nearly broke me. I lay awake every night, staring at the ceiling, calculating and recalculating my dwindling bank account. I started having panic attacks in grocery stores, putting items back because I couldn't afford them after paying their bills. I even got a part-time job at a local bookstore at 67 years old, standing on my feet for hours, just so I could contribute even more to their household. My back ached constantly, my ankles swelled, but I smiled through it because they needed me. Or so I thought. But somewhere along the way, Ivy started treating me less like family and more like hired help. And I started accepting it because what choice did I have? I had given up my entire life to be here. I found myself cooking their Sunday dinners, cleaning their house, doing their laundry. When her friends came over, she'd introduce me as Erickson's mom who helps out around here. Like I was the cleaning lady, not the grandmother who was funding their lifestyle. The warning signs were everywhere, but I was too desperate to belong to see them clearly. Emma started calling me Florence instead of Grandma whenever Ivy was around. I noticed I was being excluded from family photos that ended up on social media. They'd literally ask me to step out of frame before taking pictures. My opinion stopped mattering in family decisions. I'd suggest something for Emma's education or well-being, and Ivy would dismiss it with a wave of her hand. Florence, we've got this handled. The final slap in the face was when Ivy's mother came to visit from California, and they actually asked me to leave the house because it would be too crowded with me there. I spent that week in my tiny apartment, eating canned soup and wondering what I had done wrong. I called twice to ask if I could take Emma for ice cream, just to see her, and both times Ivy said Emma was busy with her real grandmother. Real grandmother. Those words echoed in my head for days. I started losing weight because I couldn't afford to feed myself properly after supporting them. I developed insomnia, lying awake replaying conversations, wondering if I had said something wrong, done something wrong. I caught myself checking my reflection obsessively, wondering if I looked too old, too tired, too much like a burden. My hair started falling out from stress. I had to start taking blood pressure medication because the constant anxiety was affecting my heart. But I kept giving, kept sacrificing, kept hoping that if I just loved them enough, if I just gave enough, I'd earn my place back in their hearts. Every rejection felt like a test I was failing. Every dismissal made me try harder. I was drowning, but I kept swimming toward people who were holding my head underwater. What I didn't know was that my exclusion wasn't random. It was systematic, it was planned, and it had been happening for months before Emma's birthday party. 3 weeks before Emma's birthday, I asked about the party plans. Ivy looked at me with this cold expression and said, "The family," and she emphasized the word family like I wasn't part of it, was planning something special. I assumed I was included. I even offered to help pay for some of the cost, like I always did, but I started noticing things. Conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Hushed phone calls that ended abruptly when I walked by. Ivy's sister visited and did not acknowledge me when I said hello. Emma mentions party details, then looking confused when Ivy shot her a warning look. I found out later that they had created a group chat for party planning. Everyone was in it except me. They had been discussing venue options, guest lists, and menu choices for weeks. My own son was part of conversations about his daughter's birthday party, and I wasn't even mentioned except as a potential problem to manage. The cruelest part was that they had prepared Emma for my absence. They told her I might not be able to make it because I was getting older and sometimes forgot things. They were already planting seeds in her mind that I was unreliable, forgettable, disposable. That week, I left the city to the nearest city to take some rest. Then came the phone call that would change everything. 2 days before the party, Erickson called me with what sounded like genuine excitement. "Mom, we really want you there. Fly out, Emma specifically asked for you." When I hesitated about the cost of a last-minute flight, he quickly added, "Don't worry about the cost, Mom. We'll take care of everything. This is Emma's special day." The excitement in his voice was so convincing. For a moment, I felt like I mattered again. I felt wanted. I started planning what to wear, what gift to bring. I even called the restaurant to ask about their menu so I could suggest something Emma might like. What I didn't know was that Ivy was in the background during that call, coaching him on what to say. What I didn't know was that they had already made the reservation for exactly the number of people they wanted. And I wasn't counted. What I didn't know was that when Erickson promised to reimburse my flight, it was just another lie in a web of deception they had carefully constructed. So I did what I always did. I played along. I put on my best dress, the navy blue one with the pearl buttons that Emma always said made me look elegant. I carefully wrapped her gift, a beautiful jewelry box I'd been saving for months to buy, using money I couldn't really afford to spend. I booked the most expensive last-minute flight I'd ever purchased, draining what little savings I had left because my son had promised Emma specifically asked for me. When I landed at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, reality hit me like a brick wall. No one came to pick me up. I stood in that pickup area for 30 minutes, calling Erickson's phone over and over, watching other families reunite while I stood there alone, like discarded luggage. When I finally gave up and called an Uber, spending another $45 I couldn't afford, I still believed it was just a miscommunication. I arrived at Romano's exactly when they told me to, and I waited in that lobby like an obedient dog, my heart full of hope and love. I called Erickson when they were late. "We're just running behind, Mom. We'll be there soon." His voice was different now, distracted, almost annoyed. So I waited another hour, growing increasingly anxious, checking my phone obsessively. Moments later, Ivy sent me pictures of the birthday celebration. That's when I realized the truth. My absence wasn't an accident. It was planned. They wanted me to feel stupid, and they succeeded. The systematic nature of my exclusion became clear at that moment. This wasn't about one birthday party. This was about erasing me completely while still keeping me available for their convenience. And they had made me pay for my own humiliation, literally. But the most heartbreaking part of all this was watching Emma navigate the lies her parents had constructed around my absence. When Erickson finally brought Emma to my place for the weekend, she was carrying so much confusion and pain that it broke my heart completely. She ran to me crying, but her words revealed the depth of the manipulation. "Grandma, why did you leave us? Mommy said you didn't love us anymore because we couldn't pay you back for all the money you gave us. She said you found new people who had more money and that's why you didn't want to be our family anymore." They had poisoned my granddaughter's mind against me. They had made her believe that my love was conditional, transactional. This innocent child thought I had abandoned her because they couldn't afford me. Mommy cried after the birthday party. Emma continued, tears streaming down her face. "She said you were supposed to come, but that you decided not to because you were mad at us. I kept asking where you were, and Daddy said you had more important things to do." The lies were layered and cruel. They had made Emma believe that not only had I chosen not to come, but that I had hurt her mother in the process. They had turned my absence into evidence of my selfishness while painting themselves as the victims of my cruelty. "I drew you a picture for your birthday," Emma whispered, pulling a crumpled piece of paper from her backpack. It was a drawing of the two of us in my art studio, with "I love you, Grandma Florence," written in her careful handwriting. "But Mommy said you probably wouldn't want it anymore." I looked at Erickson standing behind her, using his own daughter as an emotional weapon. And I realized that this man I had saved from abandonment, raised with all my love, sacrificed everything for, was now abandoning me in the cruelest way possible. And he was teaching Emma that love was something you could lose if you weren't good enough, rich enough, convenient enough. The damage they had done to this child's understanding of love and family was perhaps the most unforgivable part of their betrayal. They had made her complicit in my exclusion while simultaneously making her grieve my absence. That night, I had the worst panic attack of my life. I ended up in the emergency room at 3 a.m., convinced I was dying. The doctor ran tests and told me my heart was fine, but my blood pressure was so high, it was dangerous. He asked me if I was under severe stress, and I finally broke down and told him everything. This stranger in scrubs showed me more compassion in 10 minutes than my own family had shown me in months. But sometimes, the universe has a way of opening doors just when you think you're trapped forever. While I was cleaning out old paperwork, trying to make sense of my life, I found a letter I had completely forgotten about. It was from Robert Chen, my late husband's business partner, and he had been trying to reach me for months about a property investment they had made together 15 years ago. The development had finally been sold. I was entitled to $1.2 million. $1.2 million. While I had been working at a bookstore and scraping together money to pay their mortgage, while I was having panic attacks and losing weight from stress, while I was spending my last savings on flights to my own humiliation, I was actually a millionaire who just didn't know it yet. That night, I realized I had been living like a servant when I could have been living like a queen. I contacted Robert, arranged to collect my inheritance, and for the first time in 5 years, I started planning a life that was about me. I enrolled in art classes, something I had given up 40 years ago when I became a wife and mother. I started painting again, and I remembered who I used to be before I became someone's ATM. I rented a beautiful studio apartment downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows and furniture that I actually loved instead of hand-me-downs. I joined a book club, made new friends who valued my opinions, and I even started dating George, a kind widower from my art class who treated me like I was precious instead of disposable. For 3 months, I didn't contact Erickson or Ivy. I didn't babysit, didn't send money, didn't ask how they were doing. I was learning what it felt like to live for myself again. And honestly, it felt incredible. My panic attacks stopped, my blood pressure returned to normal, the tremor in my hands disappeared. I started sleeping through the night for the first time in years. But they weren't done with me yet. And what they tried to do next would backfire so spectacularly that it would destroy their lives completely. Those 3 months of silence were apparently too much for Erickson and Ivy to handle, because suddenly my phone started ringing nonstop. Erickson was calling frantically. Ivy had planned a weekend trip and needed a babysitter. When I didn't answer, the calls became more desperate. "Mom, where are you? We really need you." But for the first time in 5 years, I had plans of my own. They drove to my old apartment, only to discover I had moved. The landlord told them I had given notice months ago. They went to the bookstore where I used to work, and my former manager told them I had quit. No explanation, no forwarding information. I had simply vanished from their convenient little world. But Ivy is nothing if not persistent, and her desperation revealed just how calculated her previous behavior had been. She started calling my old neighbors, my former coworkers, even the mailman, trying to track me down. She created fake social media accounts to try to find me online. She even called the Chicago phone book company, trying to find old friends of mine who might know where I went. When she finally found my social media, what she discovered must have shocked her to her core. My Facebook and Instagram, which I had barely touched before, were now filled with photos of me at art gallery openings, dinner parties with sophisticated friends, travel photos from weekend getaways with George. In every single picture, I looked radiant, confident, genuinely happy, surrounded by people who actually valued my company. I can only imagine Ivy staring at those photos, realizing that the woman she had been treating like hired help was living a life more glamorous than her own. She could see the expensive art supplies in my studio, the designer clothes I was wearing, the upscale restaurants I was dining at. The grandmother she thought she had broken was thriving without them. But the discovery that probably terrified her most was a photo of me at a financial advisor's office, shaking hands with a well-dressed man next to a sign that read, "Estate Planning Services." For the first time, Ivy realized that I might have money she didn't know about. That's when Erickson decided to pull out the big guns. He showed up at my home. Somehow he had tracked me down through the community center's public schedule, and he didn't come alone. He brought Emma. The moment I saw her, my heart shattered. She ran to me crying, "Grandma, why did you leave us? Mommy said you didn't love us anymore, and that's why you didn't come to my birthday party." I could see through Erickson's manipulation immediately. using an innocent child as a weapon, but hearing those words from Emma's mouth destroyed me. What made it worse was realizing that they had been coaching Emma for weeks about what to say. She repeated almost word for word the script that Ivy had prepared. "Mommy says you have a new family now, and you don't want to see us anymore. She says rich people don't care about regular families like ours." I knelt down and held her tight, and I told her the truth in the simplest way I could. "Emma, sweetheart, I love you more than anything in this world, but sometimes grown-ups need to take care of themselves too." Erickson stood there watching us, and I could see the calculation in his eyes. He thought he had won. He thought bringing Emma would guilt me back into my old role. A week later, Ivy called with honey dripping from her voice. "Florence, we think there's been a misunderstanding. Why don't you come over for dinner so we can work this out as a family?" Against my better judgment, I agreed, but only because I wanted to see Emma again. If you're wondering whether people can really be this calculating and cruel to someone who sacrificed everything for them, hit that subscribe button because you're about to see manipulation at its finest. When I arrived at their house that evening, I walked into what felt like an ambush. Ivy's entire family was there. Her parents, her siblings, everyone sitting around the living room like I was on trial. But what I didn't immediately realize was that this intervention had been planned for weeks. Ivy had been coaching her family members on what to say, how to position the conversation, and what outcomes she wanted. Ivy's mother, Patricia, looked at me with pure disdain, and I realized this wasn't a reconciliation dinner. This was a coordinated attack designed to break me down and force me back into my subservient role. They had even positioned the seating so that I would be isolated on one side of the room while they formed a united front against me. The moment I sat down, Patricia launched her attack with words that had clearly been rehearsed. "Florence, I don't understand how you could abandon your family when they needed you most. Erickson and Ivy have been struggling, and you just disappeared like some selfish woman having a midlife crisis." Ivy jumped in immediately, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Florence, we've always known you resented helping us. You were jealous of the attention Emma gave her real family. We tried to include you, but you always seemed bitter about everything we did." I sat there listening to them rewrite history, watching them paint me as the villain in a story where I had given them everything. The audacity was breathtaking, but what hurt most was realizing that these weren't spontaneous accusations. These were talking points that had been discussed and refined in preparation for this moment. But I had come prepared for this moment too. I calmly pulled out my phone and opened Instagram. "Ivy, since you're so concerned about including me, let me show everyone something interesting." I turned the screen toward the room, showing the posts from Emma's birthday party. "These are your posts from 3 months ago. Emma's 12th birthday party at Romano's restaurant." The room went quiet as I swiped through the photos. Here's Emma blowing out her candles. Here's her opening presents. Here's the whole family celebrating. And here's what you all don't know. While you were posting these happy family moments, I was sitting in the parking lot outside, watching through the window like some kind of stalker. Ivy's face went pale. "Florence, I don't know what you're talking about." "You deliberately excluded me from my granddaughter's birthday party," I continued, my voice steady and calm. "But more than that, you planned it for months. You made me fly out from Chicago, knowing you had no intention of including me. You didn't pick me up from the airport. You left me stranded there like luggage. You made me wait in that restaurant lobby for over an hour while you celebrated without me. And when I called wondering where you were, you sent me photos of the party I was excluded from." Emma looked confused and hurt. "Grandma, I didn't know you were supposed to be there. Mommy said you didn't want to come to family things anymore." "And the flight ticket Erickson promised to reimburse me for? The one that cost me my last $300? I'm still waiting for that money. You made me pay for my own humiliation." The silence in that room was deafening. Patricia looked shocked, and Ivy's siblings were staring at her with disgust. They were realizing that the misunderstanding they had been called to help resolve was actually deliberate cruelty. But Ivy wasn't done. She stood up, her voice shaking with anger. Fine. Maybe we made a mistake with the birthday party, but that doesn't explain where you got the money for this fancy new lifestyle of yours. The expensive apartment, the art classes, the designer clothes. Did you find yourself a sugar daddy, Florence? That's when I smiled. Oh, Ivy, you really want to know where the money came from? I reached into my purse and pulled out the letter from Robert Chen. 15 years ago, my husband and his business partner invested in a property development. I had completely forgotten about it. 3 months ago, I discovered that the development was sold. I inherited $1.2 million. The color drained from Ivy's face completely. Patricia's mouth fell open. Erickson looked like he had been slapped. That's right, I continued. While I was working part-time at a bookstore at 67 years old to help pay your mortgage, while I was sacrificing my retirement savings to fund your lifestyle, while I was spending my last dollars on flights to parties I wasn't invited to, I was actually a millionaire who just didn't know it yet. You've been treating a millionaire like your personal servant. But I wasn't finished. The rage that had been building inside me for 5 years was about to explode, and I had one more truth bomb that would destroy them completely. Erickson, since you and your wife have decided to treat me like a stranger, since you've made it clear that I'm not really part of this family, I think it's time Emma knew the truth about something very important. Erickson's eyes widened with fear. Mom, what are you doing? I'm not actually your biological mother, Erickson. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. I adopted you when you were 3 years old, after your birth mother abandoned you at a gas station in Detroit. The social worker called you unadoptable because you had been so traumatized by the abandonment. But I chose to love you. I chose to raise you. I chose to sacrifice everything for you. The room was completely silent. Erickson's face had gone white as a sheet. Emma looked confused and heartbroken. Ivy was staring at her husband like she was seeing him for the first time. Every single thing I did for you was a choice, I continued. When you were 5 and had nightmares every night for 2 years, I chose to hold you. When you were expelled from school for fighting, I chose to find you help. When you couldn't afford college, I chose to take out loans to pay for your education. When you got married, I chose to give you my grandmother's ring for Ivy. When you needed help with Emma, I chose to move across the country and give up my entire life. Tears were streaming down Erickson's face. Mom, I never knew. But you've chosen to treat me like hired help. You've chosen to exclude me from family moments. You've chosen to humiliate me and use me and discard me when it's convenient. So now I'm making another choice. I'm choosing to stop being your doormat. Patricia tried to salvage the situation. Florence, surely we can work this out. Families have misunderstandings. This wasn't a misunderstanding, I said, standing up. This was deliberate cruelty. This was a 5-year campaign to erase me from my own family while using my money and my love to support your lifestyle. And the saddest part is that you're also concerned about what I can do for you financially, that you've forgotten I'm a human being who deserves basic respect. The devastation in that room was complete. Erickson was sobbing, realizing that the woman he had been treating like garbage was the angel who had saved his life. Ivy looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor, knowing that her manipulation had been exposed in front of her entire family. Emma was crying, not understanding why the adults were being so cruel to each other. And I walked out of that house feeling lighter than I had in years. Because I had finally told the truth that had been burning inside me for 5 long years. I stood up calmly, my voice steady and clear. I will always love you, Erickson and Emma, but I will never again allow myself to be treated as less than family. Emma, sweetheart, you are always welcome in my life, but it will be on terms of mutual respect, not as someone's obligation or burden, but as someone who is genuinely wanted. And then I walked out of that house, leaving behind 5 years of humiliation and heartbreak. The consequences were swift and brutal. Within days, word had spread through their social circle about what had happened. Ivy's own family turned on her when they learned the truth about the birthday party deception and the years of manipulation. Her sister called her disgusting. Her parents were horrified that they had participated in ambushing a woman who had sacrificed so much for their family. Their mutual friends, the ones who had watched me babysit Emma every weekend and contribute to their lifestyle, took my side completely. Ivy found herself socially isolated, whispered about at school pickup and neighborhood gatherings. The woman who had orchestrated my humiliation was now experiencing her own. But the cruelest irony was that Ivy's own manipulation tactics were now being used against her. Her family members started excluding her from group chats, making plans without her, treating her exactly the way she had taught them to treat me. Erickson was devastated. Learning about his adoption, understanding the depth of my sacrifices, realizing that every single day of his life had been a gift from someone who chose to love him, it broke him completely. He started therapy to deal with the trauma of both his original abandonment and the guilt of what he had done to me. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my art studio, natural light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, painting a portrait of Emma. But this isn't from memory, it's from our lunch together last Saturday. Because Emma visits me every Saturday now, and we've built a relationship based on genuine love, rather than obligation. Erickson has been slowly, carefully trying to rebuild our relationship. He writes me letters, goes to therapy, and shows up consistently, not when he needs something, but because he's finally learning what family actually means. It's been a long road, but we're getting there. He also finally sent me the money for that flight ticket, with interest and a handwritten apology that was 3 pages long. I've learned something profound through all of this. I spent 5 years trying to earn love from people who had already decided I was disposable. I was shrinking myself, giving everything I had, hoping that if I just loved them enough, if I just sacrificed enough, they would finally see my worth. But the love worth having doesn't require you to diminish yourself to receive it. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is showing them the consequences of taking you for granted. Not out of cruelty, but out of self-respect. Because when you stop accepting crumbs, you make room for people who want to give you the whole feast. Last week, I had my first solo art exhibition. 40 years after I gave up painting to be a wife and mother, I was standing in a gallery surrounded by my work, surrounded by friends who celebrate my successes instead of exploiting my generosity. And there, in the back of the room, were Erickson and Emma. Not because they needed something from me, but because they wanted to support me. Not as servants to my generosity, but as family who finally understand my worth. I want you to think about this. Have you ever stayed in a relationship, family, friendship, or romantic, where you were giving everything and getting crumbs in return? Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away and show people what life looks like without you in it. What would change in your life if you stopped accepting less than you deserve? The woman sitting in that airport and then that restaurant lobby 6 months ago, watching her family celebrate without her, thought her story was ending, but it was actually just beginning. And sometimes, the best chapters of your life start the moment you decide you're worth more than the role others have assigned you. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever felt taken for granted by people you love, hit that subscribe button, because your worth isn't determined by how much you give, it's determined by how much you respect yourself. And remember, it's never too late to reclaim your power and demand the love you deserve.